Welcome back to the deep dive, the place where we take the most concentrated, profound insights from source material and really expand them into something genuinely unforgettable and hopefully actionable.
And today, we're looking at something remarkable.
Absolutely. You shared with us one of the most direct texts in the entire spiritual landscape, the Bāhiyasutta.
It really is the pinnacle of direct instruction. So today, our mission is to embark on an intensive, almost moment-by-moment decoding of this sutta.
And it's famous because it describes a path that is so immediate, so radical, that it led the listener, Bāhiya, directly to arahant phala.
The ultimate state of liberation and happiness, yes.
So when we talk about liberation, let's be clear, we're defining the goal as becoming an arahant, one who has, achieved total freedom from suffering.
Right.
What makes the Bāhiyasutta so unique is that it doesn't lay out a 20-year meditation journey. It offers a concise, almost surgical mechanism. I've heard it called the ultimate check engine light for consciousness.
That's a great way to put it. It provides the practice, the method, and the immediate result all packaged together. It's just so potent.
And it's not totally alone, is it? This kind of direct pointing exists elsewhere.
That's right. It's so powerful that the core instruction is paralleled in other important texts, like the Sutta, and even in the very detailed methods in MN 112 Chabisatthana Sutta, which is all about purifying insight. The Buddha basically gave Bāhiya an absolute shortcut.
But shortcuts only really work if you know the terrain you're trying to cut through. So before we get to the solution, we have to define the problem.
We have to.
What is the default terrain of the human mind? What's the standard operating system that keeps us perpetually bound?
The standard operating system is dukkha, and it's perpetuated by what we call cognitive proliferation. So to really understand how liberation is achieved, we first have to understand the 4 mandatory functions that operate in our consciousness during every single mind moment.
Okay, mandatory functions. So these are happening all the time, whether we want them to or not.
All the time. And these 4 functions are, you could say, the very machinery of our entanglement.
Let's lay them out then, because I feel like understanding their sequence is the absolute prerequisite for understanding how this sutta so brilliantly interrupts them.
Okay, so the first is focus. This is just the initial direction of consciousness toward an object of the senses. You open your eyes, and your visual consciousness is immediately directed towards light, towards shapes. It's involuntary.
Right. Focus is the aiming mechanism. Simple enough. What's next?
Second is attention. This is often related to the Pali term manasikara. Now, this function is critical because it's the mechanism that actually takes on the object. It prepares that raw sensory data to be processed for a conscious experience.
So it's like the moment a camera sensor actually captures the light after you've pointed the lens.
Exactly. Perfect analogy. So we have the sensory system aimed, and attention grabs the raw data.
And the third step, this is where I think the real trouble starts for most of us, for the untrained mind.
It absolutely is. The third function is observation. This is the cognitive function that processes the data and leads to awareness of specifics, shape, color, taste, location, or even the pattern of a thought. Observation is where we move from just sensing to conceptualizing.
And the final one.
The culmination of all this is awareness, the fully conscious, subjective experience itself. I am seeing a tree. I am hearing a bird.
Okay, so here's the question. Why is this cycle the problem? It sounds like just how the mind works.
It is, but here's why. Because attention is relentlessly grabbing new sensory input, right? And observation is constantly applying context and labels. The shape is a tree, that sound is unpleasant. There's this continuous self-reinforcing flow.
The sources call it a moving picture.
Yes, and why does that moving picture prevent stillness? Because the picture is never the same from one moment to the next. The constant stream of changing conceptualized experiences forces the mind into perpetual variation.
So every new observation leads to a new label, a new assessment, a new reaction.
Precisely. The mind never just rests in the pure apprehension of the sensory input. It immediately leaps to interpretation, to story-making. And this ceaseless proliferation of meaning prevents the stillness required for insight. The Bāhiyasutta is designed to stop that third function observation from creating the conceptual picture in the first place.
Okay, so let's unpack this ultimate instruction from the Buddha. It's so concise, almost deceptively simple, but I know it's linguistically loaded. We are committed to a deep dive into the etymology of these Pali passages, so this is where we have to start.
It is. And the instruction begins with a command for immediate, rigorous practice. The Buddha says, "Tasmatihate Bāhiya eva sikitabhau."
Which we can translate roughly as, therefore, Bāhiya, you should train yourself thus. But let's zoom in, really get microscopic on that word, sikutaba. What is the force, the weight behind that word?
Well, sikitaba is far more potent than just you should practice. It comes from the root sik, which means to learn or to train, but it's combined with this suffix, itaba. Now, this suffix, the necessary passive participle, it removes any sense of suggestion. It imposes an absolute obligation. So it means, very precisely, it must be trained or it is necessary to learn.
So it's not a friendly piece of advice, it's a direct command.
It establishes that this is not some casual exploration of wisdom. This is a foundational commitment that determines the entire path forward. The gravity is immediate. Bāhiya, this is what you must do right now.
Wow. That really sets the tone for radical commitment. And the content of this necessary training, the thus, is laid out in those famous 4 parallel phrases. And they're all built around one central linguistic stop sign, mata.
Mata is the absolute key to the entire sutta. It's often translated as only or mere. Its function is one of radical limitation.
Limitation in what way?
It restricts the cognitive process to the bare minimum of sensory input. It basically prevents the mind from performing that complex third function we talked about, observation and conceptual labeling, that leads to all the trouble or proliferation.
Oh, okay. Let's break down the 4 applications of this mata principle, one by one, starting with the sense of sight.
Okay. The first is diṭṭhamattaṁ bāhiyasutta.
Right.
So diṭṭhe is the locative case of diya. It means in the seen or in the visible data. It's just the bare occurrence of visual input.
And then diṭṭhamattaṁ.
That's the crucial component. Only the seen, or the seen merely. And bāhiyasutta means it will be or it shall become. So the full literal instruction is, in the seen, there will be only the seen.
Okay, but I need to push on this a little. If I see a house, my ordinary mind sees house, roof, wall. Are you suggesting the trained mind sees something totally different? How do you consciously strip away the label house? That seems impossible.
That's the friction point, you're right, and we have to address it. The untrained mind instantly uses sanya perception, labeling, to categorize the visual data. It overlays memory and conceptual recognition. The diṭṭhamattaṁ training forces the mind back to the raw constituents of the visual field. The light, the shadow, the colors, the edges, the geometric forms. The goal isn't to forget what a house is. Okay. It's to prevent the consciousness from clinging to the idea of house and then generating a story based on that idea. You see the difference?
I think so. It's the difference between recognizing a pattern of color and form and immediately thinking, that's my neighbor's house, which reminds me I need to talk to him about his barking dog.
Exactly. The latter is proliferation. The former is diṭṭhamattaṁ. You're just not adding the story.
That makes the task much clearer. Okay, moving on to sound then. It follows the same pattern, right? Sute, sutamattaṁ bāhiyasutta.
The exact same structure. Sute means in the herd, referring to auditory perception. Sutamattaṁ means only the herd. So the instruction is in the herd, only the herd. If a bell rings, it's the bare event of sound waves creating vibration.
It's not instantly categorized as pleasant chime or jarring noise.
Or even more, triggering a memory of a time you heard that sound before. The sound just remains sound.
This sounds intensely challenging, though, especially with human language. If someone says, you did a terrible job on that project, the raw sound waves are instantly translated into conceptual meaning, an insult, a judgment. How does sutamattaṁ handle that complexity?
It demands what sounds like an impossible pivot. But this is the very core of liberation. It means recognizing the linguistic content. Yes, the word's terrible job. But refusing to allow the consciousness to attach this self-referential label, I am insulted or I am hurt.
So the words are just acknowledged as mental objects, like sounds or concepts.
Precisely. And because of that, the reactive cycle of aversion, what we call sankara, that generates suffering is cut off. It's cut off because the self is not identified in those words. The experience of the sound and its meaning ceases without creating entanglement.
Incredible. Okay, the third phrase covers the other physical senses. Mutamattaṁ bāhiyasutta.
That's right. Mute is a collective term. It comes from muti or mutta, and it encompasses what is sensed, so, smelled, tasted, or touched. This is the realm of, immediate physical intimacy with the world.
Like the pressure of clothing, the taste of food, the warmth of the sun.
Piercing pain, yes. Mutamattaṁ means only the sensed. The teaching demands in the sensed, only the sensed. The experience of pressure is just pressure. It is not instantly This tight shoe is annoying me.
This seems absolutely vital for dealing with physical discomfort and pain. We'll definitely have to circle back to that.
We will.
But the final field, the mental realm itself, is perhaps the most difficult to regulate. Viññāte, viññātamattaṁ, Bāhiyasutta.
I would agree. Viññāte refers to what is cognized or mentally known. This captures all forms of non-sensory mental activity. Thoughts, memories, internal dialogue, planning, emotions, all of it.
And so viññātamattaṁ means?
Only the cognized.
Yeah.
The instruction is in the cognized, only the cognized.
So a thought about my upcoming grocery list is simply an instance of cognition. It's not a necessary task that must be obsessed over, and it's certainly not a reflection of my character. It's just known, and then it ceases.
Precisely. And think about a profound self-critical thought. I am a failure. The training is to see that cluster of conceptual objects as merely viññāte, a momentary electrical and chemical firing pattern in the brain.
Not a truth about the self.
Because the self is not located in that thought. This is why this fourth phrase is really the ultimate test of the arahant path, controlling proliferation in the mind field itself.
So, diṭṭhamattaṁ, sutamattaṁ, mutamattaṁ, viññātamattaṁ. If Bāhiya can achieve this, he has perfectly fulfilled the command. Viññāte, Bāhiya, sikitaba, the pack is complete.
Yes. We've established the formula. Now let's dissect the machinery of suffering that this formula so elegantly dismantles. We have to understand how the untrained mind inevitably falls into what we can call the dukkha cycle.
Right, and how the Tao principle acts as a cognitive circuit breaker.
Exactly.
So let's detail that typical sequence again. We start with an object arising and attention-making contact, which is phassa. What happens next in the untrained mind?
Contact immediately triggers feeling, or vedana. This just registers the experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If the light wave is a bright, hot sun, it's unpleasant. If the sound is soothing music, it's pleasant. This is still pretty automatic.
But that feeling is instantly coupled with a label, isn't it?
Yes. That feeling triggers perception, or sanya. This is the labeling and recognition phase. Hot, smooth, threat, good music. This is the critical transition from bare sensation into a conceptual reality.
And that recognition quickly leads to
Volition or reaction. The Pali is sakra.
And this is where the story begins. Aversion to the unpleasant feeling or grasping toward the pleasant one.
Correct. The mind starts manufacturing stories, predictions, self-referential narratives. I must stop this pain, or I want this pleasure to last forever. This is the moment where consciousness proliferates. It expands outward.
I see this beautiful thing which reminds me of that vacation I took, and now I hate my life because I am not on vacation, that sort of thing.
That is the perfect example. And the technical term for this mental manufacturing, which we really have to delve into, is papaññāka.
Papaññāka.
Mental proliferation. It's the tendency of the mind to fabricate, to exaggerate, and to construct these complex illusions based on just a momentary contact. The moment the mind takes the label, sanya, and builds a story, sakkara, it is engaging in papaññāka. That is the engine of suffering.
And the inevitable binding consequence of this entire cascade.
The disastrous outcome is the emergence and reinforcement of self-view, or sakkayati. The narrative always concludes with, I am seeing, this is my pain, or I am the one being insulted.
The self is inserted, reinforced, and identified with this ever-changing, impermanent object.
Which leads directly to entanglement and dukkha.
Okay, so if the untrained mind is this 7-step cascade into suffering, where exactly does the diṭṭhamattaṁ training perform its surgical cut?
It acts right between steps 2 and 3. Between contact, phassa, and the feeling perception, vedana stage. The mind must sense the object. That's just the nature of consciousness. But the training prevents the immediate cascade into conceptual labeling, narrative creation, and crucially, self-insertion.
So diṭṭhamattaṁ is basically the refusal to cooperate with the momentum of papaññāka.
Precisely. You acknowledge the contact, but you starve the proliferation. You bypass the labeling process that would otherwise trigger that whole I am reaction. The mind remains in a state of bare cognition. It arrests the momentum before it generates any volitional entanglement.
You know, I find the analogy provided in the sources for the trained mind, the mind like a mirror, incredibly helpful here. It simplifies this whole complex process into a single, beautiful image.
The mirror analogy is potent, isn't it? It illustrates purity and non-attachment at the same time. The mirror reflects the object, the seen, the heard, the sensed, and it does so perfectly, without any distortion.
It registers the visual data flawlessly. But what are the mirror's 3 crucial qualities that we are training our minds to emulate?
Okay, first, The mirror makes no judgment. It reflects beauty and ugliness with absolute neutrality. There is no Vedana, no pleasant or unpleasant feeling added to the reflection.
Okay, no judgment.
Second, it never holds on to the reflection. The moment the object leaves, the reflection vanishes. This demonstrates impermanence and non-clinging.
And the third one, which feels like the critical one for arahantship.
It is. The mirror never applies self-judgment or ownership. It doesn't think, this is my reflection, and therefore I am beautiful, or ugly for that matter.
Right.
The mind trained in diṭṭhamattaṁ operates identically. It registers the light waves, that cognitive moment ceases, and no ego or attachment remains to carry the momentum forward.
So when this training is perfected, and the mind really operates like this neutral, reflecting mirror, the sutta then shifts. It moves from the instructional command, the sikkhāta, to describing the radical outcome.
Yes, the three negations of self-location. This is the ultimate description of nibbana.
Let's hear that Pali text. It's so profound.
It's the philosophical climax of the sutta. It's a sequence of logical dismantling. Diṭṭhe, tatatva, Bāhiyanattena, tatatva, Bāhiyanatena, tatata, Bāhiyanata, tatatva, Bāhiyanata, tatata, Bāhiya, viññāte mantarena, esavantadukasati.
That is the complete blueprint for non-existence in a way.
Yeah.
Let's start with that first negation, nattane.
Diṭṭhe, Bāhiyanatena. Then Bāhiya, you're not by that. We have to understand the nuance of that preposition tena. It means by that, because of that, or characterized by that.
So if you successfully maintain diṭṭhamattaṁ, the sensory experience can't be used to define you?
Exactly. It cannot be used as a characteristic definition of the self. If I see a beautiful sunset, I am not characterized by the beauty of the sunset.
And if I hear criticism, I am not characterized by the shame of the criticism.
Yeah.
The self is entirely separate from the quality of the perception.
You've got it. The self is released from this constant, exhausting task of having to define itself based on the contents of consciousness. The identity construction that relies on the five aggregates, the khandhas, which includes perception, feeling, and form, is completely invalidated.
So if the content of consciousness is just content,
it can't sustain the you that is built upon it.
And once that characterization is removed, the second negation addresses location, nattata.
Padova, Bāhiya, natata. Then you are not in that. Katha simply means there or in that place. This removes the subjective locus, the location.
So if you're not defined by the experience, then logically you can't be contained within the experience either.
Exactly. The awareness is happening, the object is present, but the subjective possessive self is not located in the seen object, or in the heard sound, or in the experienced sensation.
This sounds like such a fundamental shift in perspective. If I am not defined by the experience and I am not located in the experience, then where does the mind even exist?
And that question leads to the profound, radical conclusion. The third negation, which dismantles the possibility of any locatable existence, or what we call the text states, tatosva Bāhiya nivida horana ubahimantarena.
Okay, let's map those three impossible locations.
Nivida means neither here, so not in the present imminent moment of experience. Nahura means nor beyond or nor there, so not in the future, the past, the conceptual space outside the immediate sensory field.
And the last part.
And na upayamantarena means nor in between the two.
So that's a total dissolution of location within space and time. If you cannot be found in the present moment, or in the conceptual realm of past and future, or even in the transition between them, you are, quite literally, nowhere.
You are rendered radically non-locatable. And this absence of a fixed, definable self or location is the ultimate meaning of cessation, of nibbana. It reveals the intrinsic suññāta, the emptiness of all phenomena.
The idea that they lack any inherent self-nature or substance to cling to.
Yes, if you are nowhere, you cannot suffer in time or space.
And this connects directly back to that concept of becoming, of bhava. The proliferation of consciousness stops reinforcing existence itself.
Exactly. Bhava is that psychological process of continuous becoming, the construction of a new identity moment after moment. If namarupa, mind and matter, does not entangle through this identification process, thanks to diṭṭhamattaṁ, then consciousness doesn't proliferate into the next link of becoming.
The chain of suffering, which is built on the assumption of a locatable self, just collapses.
It has to. And this is why the Buddha concludes the entire instruction with that final triumphant line, Esavantadukasa. This is truly the end of suffering. The cessation of self-location is the cessation of dukkha.
You know, it is just incredible how precise this ancient spiritual instruction is. It provides a mechanism that seems to directly target the very structures that modern cognitive science identifies as being responsible for our self-referential suffering.
It really does.
It feels like the Buddha provided a highly efficient protocol for, I don't know, hacking the ego reinforcement loop.
That analogy is perfect. The entire dukkha cycle we discussed, the labeling, the narrating, the reinforcing of the self, it maps almost perfectly onto the activity of our brain's sophisticated internal structures. We're talking specifically about the default mode network, or the DMN.
Okay, so for our listeners who may not be steeped in neuroscience, how does the DMN operate, and why is it the neurological equivalent of papaññāka?
The DMN is a network of interconnected brain regions, like the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex. That becomes active primarily when we are not focusing on an external task. Its job is internal narration.
So daydreaming, worrying.
Reflecting on the past, simulating the future, moral reasoning, and most critically for our conversation, self-referential thought. It generates the ongoing narrative of I and me.
So when I see a house and my mind instantly leaps to, that house is too big, I wish my house was that big, that competitive comparison. That's the DMN firing up and creating a story.
Absolutely. The moment attention grabs the object, the prefrontal cortex uses stored memory and context to apply labels and significance. That's our old friend Sonia. That conceptual labeling triggers the DMN. Consciousness then loops around the object not to simply apprehend it, but to determine its significance relative to the self.
And so the ego structure is reinforced. I see, I judge, I remember, I desire.
And this relentless generation of self-narrative is the physical, biological manifestation of papaññāka.
I sometimes think of the DMN as the brain's internal monologue generator that just runs 24/7. It seems like it's designed to make sure we never just rest in mere perception.
And that's exactly why practices like meditation, and specifically this diṭṭhamattaṁ technique, target it so effectively. When Bāhiya implements only the seen or only the known, he is forcing a fundamental shift in cognitive mode.
How so?
Well, sensory data arises, but the non-conceptual training bypasses the need for heavy DMN processing.
So what does that look like in terms of actual brain activity?
It's the difference between conceptual cognition and bare sensory processing. Conceptual cognition is high cost. It requires the prefrontal cortex to compare, contrast, and integrate the experience into the existing eye structure. Bare cognition, the metta state, involves the primary sensory cortices activating, but the higher order labeling and narrative creation are basically starved of attention.
Wait, are you saying that diṭṭhamattaṁ is essentially a command to the brain to stop creating a fictional story around sensory input?
That is precisely what it is. The self, as we perceive it, is a highly refined, continuous simulation maintained by the DMN. By refusing to label, judge, or self-reference, the activity in the DMN is profoundly subdued. The energy usually spent on reinforcing the ego is just withheld.
And since the ego structure isn't reinforced by attaching the I to the experience,
Consciousness doesn't have the launchpad to transition into the next link of becoming into bhava. The perceptual moment arises, it doesn't entangle, and it simply ceases.
the sensation ceases with the object. The moment of seeing or hearing just dissolves, and consciousness moves on to the next sensory event without carrying all the baggage of the last one.
Exactly. If there is no attachment, there is no proliferation. If there is no proliferation, there is no ego fuel. And if there is no ego, there is no one left to be found in the seen, the heard, or the known. There is no natena or natata. This ancient instruction is a master key for regulating our highest level cognitive processing.
Understanding the theory is one thing, but making this relatable for you, the learner, means we have to move this into practical, messy, moment-to-moment experience. Let's take some specific, high-impact scenarios and detail the behavioral and cognitive shift that diṭṭhamattaṁ demands.
We have to. We must show how these 4 key phrases apply to transforming ordinary, painful experience. The challenge is in transitioning from that gross, habitual reaction to bare observation.
Okay, let's revisit a scenario we touched on. Seeing an old photo. This is such a powerful trap for papaññāka and memory proliferation.
It is. In the ordinary reaction, seeing that photo triggers an immediate conceptual overlay. The visible form, the colors, the shapes, is instantaneously labeled. My high school friend John. This label then triggers volition, Sakura. I miss those days, or we had so much fun, leading to dukkha in the form of clinging to the past, or sadness about loss.
And the self is inserted, I am nostalgic for this time in my life.
Right. So how does the trained mind intercept this cascade?
That's the question.
The Diṭṭhamattaṁ training operates at the moment of contact. Visual data arises. Recognition of John may still occur, but the mind is rigorously instructed to see just seen, colors, shapes, light variants. The subsequent mental story, the I miss, is noted as merely viññāte, just known, a mental fabrication, and it's immediately dropped.
So the result is the raw apprehension of the image without that emotional payload of a past identity. No clinging.
No clinging.
That requires incredible vigilance. Okay, let's take something external and aggressive. Hearing criticism.
This is perhaps the hardest challenge, I think, because language is designed to provoke an ego reaction. In the ordinary reaction, someone says, "You're incompetent." The sound waves are instantly converted into conceptual meaning, which generates immediate unpleasant vedana, that feeling.
Which then triggers the volitional reaction of anger, shame, defensive papanyeka. The DMN lights up with self-defense. I am being attacked. I must defend myself.
Yes, the self is identified with the criticism.
So the trained mind, practicing sutamattaṁ, has to somehow defuse the language.
It demands that you intercept the conversion of sound into self-attack. The Diṭṭhamattaṁ training registers, just heard, sound waves, complex linguistic patterns. The mind notes the conceptual meaning, incompetent, but treats it as an external, transient mental object, completely separate from the self.
The key insight being, the criticism is about their perception, not about the reality of myself.
Precisely. Since the self is not located in the sound, not tafa, there is no ego reaction, and the criticism is just allowed to cease as sound waves.
That is true liberation from the opinions of others. Wow. Now what about the internal dialogue? The thought, I'm unworthy.
Well, the ordinary mind treats that thought as an inherent truth generated by the DMN. It becomes the definition of identity. The loop continues. I am unworthy, therefore I feel shame, therefore I ruminate on my mistakes. This just amplifies depression and reinforces the negative self-view.
But using viññātamattaṁ reveals the thought's true nature.
Yes. The Diṭṭhamattaṁ training recognizes this thought cluster as just known. It is a momentary mental event, an impermanent fabrication. It's treated the same way you would treat hearing a distant truck horn. It's observed, it's noted, and it's allowed to pass without judgment or attachment.
It has no substance to cling to.
None. The result is immediate release from that identity reinforcement, realizing that a thought is not a fact.
Let's conclude this practical section with the ultimate test, handling bodily pain. This is where the mind often clings most fiercely to the self. My body, my pain.
This is where we see the most visceral difference between sensation and suffering. When you're faced with physical discomfort, a headache, an injury, the ordinary mind immediately labels the raw sensation as pain. This label is then met with intense aversion and fear, with sakkara.
And the mind amplifies the experience with papanyeka. This pain will never end. I hate this. I can't handle this.
And the language is always possessive. My pain.
So the suffering becomes the mental reaction to the pain, not just the physical sensation itself.
Absolutely. The suffering is the clinging to the body and the self. The trained mind, however, applies mutamattaṁ. The raw sensation is met with equanimity. It is observed as pure sensation, a changing wave of heat, pressure, tingling, vibration. It is observed as just another object of consciousness that is impermanent, Annika.
The mind avoids the label of pain as an identity.
It remains descriptive, just known. The sensation is allowed to run its course without the added layer of aversion, fear, or self-possession. Because the self is not located in the pain, the suffering is dramatically diminished. The mind gains insight into the impermanence and non-self nature, the anatta, of the sensation.
So if the mind can maintain this non-locatability, this radical bareness of consciousness across all four fields, the seen, heard, sensed, and known, then consciousness itself ceases to proliferate into becoming. The mirror reflects, and then the reflection is gone. No residue.
And that is the crux of the Bāhiyasutta. Consciousness does not move from one object to the next, building a continuous, flawed story about who I am. It arises and ceases with each contact, unburdened by self-view. When papanyeka stops, the self vanishes, and there is no one left to experience dukkha.
Bringing this deep dive full circle, the story of Bāhiya himself stands as the ultimate testimony to the power and efficiency of this instruction. I mean, this was not wisdom imparted in some leisurely, comfortable setting.
No, not at all. It was given in utmost urgency. But he is described as a man who recognized the true Buddha despite never having met him. He found the Buddha on a narrow path and desperately asked for a teaching, knowing his own life was fragile.
And the Buddha initially put him off, right, saying he was on alms round.
He did, but his fervor, his insistence, convinced the Buddha to deliver the shortest, most essential lesson possible, right there on the spot.
And the result was instantaneous. The Buddha affirmed that Bāhiya became an arahant shortly after hearing and practicing this instruction. He realized the arahant phala with total immediacy.
He cut the chain of becoming at the moment of sensory contact. It just confirms that liberation is available in the very next moment of consciousness, provided one have the wisdom and the rigorous commitment to stop the proliferation now.
So it doesn't require complex dogma, years of monastic observance, or elaborate ritual.
It requires only radical, honest, moment-to-moment vigilance over the gateways of the senses.
And the power of that final phrase really can't be overstated, defining the total outcome of this vigilance. Esavanto dukkassa.
This is truly the end of suffering. By eliminating the self's characterization and location within the realm of perception, the suffering that is predicated on that self ceases entirely.
So for you, the learner, the challenge remains in realizing just how thorough this cognitive surgery must be. If the mind truly becomes the mirror, reflecting perfectly but neither holding nor judging, neither located in nor characterized by the reflection, we have to ask ourselves, how much of our perceived life story, the one that causes us the most friction and pain, is simply a prolonged loop of reinforced conceptual reactions?
And if the vast majority of our moment-to-moment experience is merely papaññāka, just fabricated stories based on clinging to the seen, heard, sensed, and known, then the entire framework of suffering is, in a way, voluntary. What moment of intense emotional reaction could you deconstruct right now just by applying the radical limitation of diṭṭhamattaṁ, reducing the complex narrative back down to only the seen or only the known? That bare moment is the gateway to liberation.